Amarillo, Texas, July 2019. A warehouse on the eastern edge of the city, the kind of place with a loading dock, a forklift, and a shipment manifest nobody reads too closely. A worker is breaking down a pallet of automotive parts that arrived 2 days earlier from a distribution center outside Phoenix, Arizona. He reaches between two crates to shift a strap, and something small and fast moves against the back of his hand. At first it feels like nothing. A pinch, maybe a splinter. Then it isn't nothing. Within 90 seconds, the pain stops being local. It stops being a hand injury and becomes something else. A current moving up through the wrist, into the forearm, tightening the muscles as it goes. His fingers start to tingle and then to jerk on their own. Small, involuntary twitches he can't stop. His vision blurs at the edges. His tongue feels thick, numb, wrong in his mouth. He's rushed to Northwest Texas healthcare system. The attending physician sees a puncture wound, hears scorpion, and reaches for the standard protocol: supportive care, antihistamines, monitor for swelling. Expect the pain to fade within a few hours, the way it does with the striped bark scorpion that has lived in this region for as long as anyone can remember. That is the scorpion Texas Panhandle doctors are trained to expect. Its sting hurts the way a wasp sting hurts. It does not make a grown man's jaw lock. By hour 4, the symptoms have not faded. They have escalated. The patient is moved to intensive monitoring. Nobody orders a toxicology panel calibrated for neurotoxic venom, because nobody is thinking about a species whose official range ends over 600 kilometers to the west. The chart is eventually closed as an atypical arthropod envenomation resolved. No specimen was collected. No photograph was taken. The insect, whatever it was never found. It should not have been possible in the first place. That is where this begins. According to every official distribution record, the U.S. Geological Survey range maps, the peer-reviewed taxonomic surveys, the state extension service bulletins handed out at Texas Panhandle pest control offices, the Arizona bark scorpion, Centruroides sculpturatus, does not exist east of the Pecos. Its confirmed range is a tight basin, central and southern Arizona, a narrow strip of southeastern California, a corner of southwestern New Mexico. It is a creature of the Sonoran Desert specifically, adapted to rock crevices, saguaro country, and the particular thermal rhythm of that basin. Every field guide agrees. Every regional health department bulletin agrees. The species is not listed as present, historically or currently, anywhere within 400 miles of Amarillo. This is not a minor point of academic disagreement. Centruroides sculpturatus is, by clinical consensus, the most medically significant scorpion in North America, the only species on the continent capable of producing systemic neurotoxic envenomation severe enough to require antivenom in vulnerable patients. Its venom is not merely painful. It is a cocktail of sodium channel modulating peptides that hijack nerve signaling directly, producing the muscle spasms, the roving eye movements, the respiratory distress that separate it categorically from every other North American scorpion sting. The Texas striped bark scorpion, Centruroides vittatus, the species doctors in the Panhandle are trained to recognize, produces a sting closer to a hornet. Sharp, local, gone in an hour. The official record says one of these animals lives in Texas and the other does not. The question is not whether Centruroides sculpturatus could survive a single accidental transport into the Texas Panhandle. Isolated hitchhikers turning up in cargo are not disputed. Pest control logs across the American Southwest are full of them. The question is whether the region has quietly become a place where such an arrival could take root, where a hitchhiking scorpion doesn't just die in a parking lot, but finds ground dry enough, warm enough, and unwatched enough to persist. The question is not whether the animal can travel. The question is whether, once it arrives, anyone would notice it was staying. To understand why the arrival itself is no longer far-fetched, you have to look past the range map and at the freight map instead, because those two documents describe two different Americas. Interstate 40 runs almost dead straight from Phoenix, Arizona to Amarillo, Texas. 640 miles of continuous freight corridor, one of the busiest east-west trucking arteries in the country, carrying agricultural goods, retail palletized freight, and, critically, nursery stock and landscaping material from Arizona growers to distribution yards across the southern plains. Every day, thousands of pallets move along this route without a single biological inspection. There is no port of entry checkpoint between Arizona and Texas. There is no customs agent checking crates for arthropods, because interstate commerce inside the United States was never built around that kind of surveillance. A truck loaded in a Phoenix warehouse at 6 in the morning can be unloaded in Amarillo by supper time the same day. A transit window shorter than the time it takes many scorpion species to become dehydrated enough to die in transit. This is not a hypothetical vulnerability. It is a documented one. State agricultural inspection logs from Arizona, Nevada, and California, the origin states of most Western nursery stock, record recurring interceptions of Centruroides scorpions in outbound shipments of potted cacti, palm root balls, and landscaping rock pallets, animals that had burrowed into substrate or wedged themselves into pallet strapping before the load ever left the yard. Pest control operators across multiple non-native states, from Florida import yards to warehouse districts in Oklahoma, have logged live Centruroides specimens recovered from shipping containers that originated in the Sonoran Basin, arrivals that were never supposed to happen, discovered only because someone happened to be unloading with a flashlight in hand. None of that alone would matter if the Panhandle were still a place hostile to the animal's survival. A single stowaway scorpion in a cold, wet climate dies quickly and takes the mystery with it. That has, for decades, been the quiet insurance policy against establishment. Geography did the monitoring that agencies never had to. That insurance policy is expiring. Climate data compiled by Texas A&M's Climatological Services over the past 3 decades shows the Texas Panhandle undergoing a measurable aridification trend. Declining average annual precipitation, rising mean summer temperatures, and, more importantly, for a burrowing arthropod, an increase in the number of consecutive dry days per year, the specific metric that determines whether desert-adapted invertebrates can complete a reproductive cycle outside their historical range. Soil moisture retention in caliche-heavy panhandle scrubland has followed the same trajectory. The region is not becoming the Sonoran Desert, but it is becoming something a Sonoran species would no longer immediately reject. It was not lost. It had simply never been supposed to be there in the first place, and the ground beneath it was quietly changing to make that irrelevant. If you've made it this far into this investigation, you already understand this isn't a story about one bad sting in one warehouse. It's a story about a gap, a place where geography, commerce, and climate have moved faster than the systems built to watch them. This channel exists for exactly that kind of gap. The case's official science hasn't closed. The animals, the record insists, shouldn't be there. If that's the kind of investigation you want more of, subscribe, because this case is not the only one, and it will not be the last. Return now to the individual case, because the Amarillo warehouse sting was not the first documented instance where symptoms failed to match the expected native species. In 2016, a separate incident was logged nearly 200 miles south in Lubbock, involving a landscaping crew unloading Arizona-sourced palm stock for a commercial installation. One worker reported a sting on the forearm while handling root ball material still packed in its original Phoenix area nursery soil. Field notes taken by a regional pest control contractor, notes later reviewed informally by an entomologist consulted for this investigation, Dr. Marisol Chen, previously affiliated with a university extension program in the Southwest, described symptom onset inconsistent with Centruroides vittatus. Numbness spreading beyond the sting site within minutes, difficulty focusing vision, and a period of roving, uncontrolled eye movement lasting nearly 20 minutes. No specimen was preserved. No follow-up biological survey of the nursery yard was conducted. The case was closed in the contractor's own paperwork as presumed native species, atypical reaction. The default explanation reached for whenever the alternative, an animal that is not supposed to exist there, is not on anyone's checklist. Not enough to confirm, not enough to dismiss. That single phrase belongs at the center of this investigation because it describes every piece of evidence gathered so far. Not enough to confirm a breeding population. Not enough to dismiss two independent symptom profiles that do not match the only scorpion panhandle medicine is trained to expect. What makes the distinction more than academic is the venom itself, a difference you can measure, not just describe. Centruroides vittatus venom acts almost entirely on peripheral pain receptors at the sting site. It hurts, it swells, and within an hour the body has metabolized the compounds enough that the sensation fades, the way a bee sting fades. Centruroides sculpturatus venom is built differently. Its primary toxins are a family of sodium channel-specific peptides that don't stay local. They act on the electrical gating mechanism of nerve cells themselves, holding sodium channels open longer than they should be, so that nerves keep firing after they should have stopped. Imagine a light switch that no longer clicks off. It stays live, sending current down a wire built to handle brief pulses, not a continuous charge. That is what sustained sodium channel activation does to a human nerve fiber. It doesn't just hurt, it misfires, producing the muscle fasciculation, the roving eye movement, the tongue numbness that both the Amarillo and Lubbock patients experienced, and that Centruroides vittatus is not known to produce in a healthy adult under any documented circumstance. That symptom set is not a coincidence of severity. It is closer to a fingerprint. To an entomologist skeptical of range expansion, and there are several who have been consulted informally in the course of this investigation, the response is direct and not unreasonable. Isolated stowaways are not a population. A single scorpion surviving a truck ride and stinging a warehouse worker proves transport is possible. It does not prove reproduction, and without reproduction there is no established range to speak of. Only an accident, however alarming, that ends with the death of one displaced animal in an environment it was never built to colonize long-term. That objection deserves to be taken seriously because it identifies exactly the right question. If a breeding population is quietly present in the Panhandle, the honest follow-up is, where is the confirming evidence? The answer is that the region has almost no mechanism capable of producing that evidence, even if the population already exists. Entomological surveillance in the Texas Panhandle, like most of the American interior, is built around economically significant agricultural pests. Grasshoppers, boll weevils, invasive beetles that threaten crop yield, not medically significant arthropods with no agricultural footprint. There is no standing survey protocol that specifically searches warehouse districts, freight yards, or nursery import sites for non-native scorpion species, because no such protocol has ever been funded. Nothing in the regional pest calendar treats Sonoran scorpion establishment in the High Plains as a plausible line item to monitor. Clinical reporting compounds the gap. Emergency departments across the Panhandle log scorpion stings under a single regional code, without species-level differentiation, because the assumption embedded in the intake software itself is that only one species is regionally possible. A sting profile inconsistent with Centruroides vittatus is far more likely to be recorded as an atypical individual reaction, an allergic response, an unusually sensitive patient, than flagged as evidence of a different species altogether, because the diagnostic categories available to the physician don't include the alternative. And even where an animal might be recovered, preservation works against the investigation. Scorpions are soft-bodied outside their exoskeleton's protective cuticle, in ways that make them poor candidates for casual identification after the fact. A specimen killed in defense during a sting incident, discarded or crushed underfoot in a warehouse, is rarely photographed, rarely preserved, and almost never sent to a taxonomist capable of distinguishing it from the native species at a glance. The evidentiary trail that would confirm establishment depends on someone in the middle of a medical emergency, deciding to bag and refrigerate an arthropod instead of killing it and moving on. That almost never happens. Finally, there is scale. The Texas Panhandle covers roughly 26,000 square miles of dry grassland, caliche outcrop, and scattered freight infrastructure. an area that would require a standing, funded, species-specific survey effort to meaningfully search, at a time when no agency has identified a reason to fund one. Absence of detection, across a territory this size and under a monitoring system built to look for something else entirely, is not evidence of absence. It may simply be evidence that no one has been looking in the right place, with the right question, for the right animal. Not enough to confirm, not enough to dismiss. The warehouse in Amarillo is still standing. The pallets still arrive from Phoenix on the same freight schedule, several times a week, the same route, the same lack of inspection. Somewhere in the space between a range map drawn decades ago and a climate record that keeps shifting the line, there is a question no agency has yet been assigned to answer. The worker who was stung in 2019 recovered. The chart was closed. The specimen, if there ever was one to find, was never collected. Perhaps it really was an isolated animal, a single stowaway, already dying, that delivered one sting and vanished into a parking lot before the ambulance arrived. That is the version the record prefers, because it is the version that requires nothing further from anyone. Or perhaps somewhere beneath a nursery pallet yard, in a crevice of caliche gone drier every summer, something has already found a way to stay. The map says it isn't there. The map was never built to see it if it were.